mass revolt. I'm coming to you from my lovely, humble home in rural North Carolina. Your host, Dust James, the Marxist-Leninist truck driver. And I'm coming to you with my good friend and co-host out of Down Under, Australia, labor organizer, David Fox. How are you doing, man?
Very good today, very good. And it's interesting trying times at the moment. We're back in a 5-day lockdown, possibly extended out further. At the moment, we've got the Delta strain in Australia here at the moment, and they're trying to control the spread. But I'm doing very well otherwise.
Right on. Well, we have a very good, honored co-host with us, a fellow member of the Center for Political Innovation, Joey Schantz.
Hi, how y'all doing today?
Brother?
All right.
Right on, man. I didn't know that y'all thing was a thing up there in Pittsburgh.
Well, originally I'm from the Philadelphia area. Not that has anything to do with it. My mother was born in Kentucky, so I got a little southern drawl on
there. You go.
So
I hear you.
Just a brief interview about who I am. As Dust explains, I'm a member of the Center for Political Innovation. I am a 21st century socialist, and I'm doing everything I can to get the Center for Political Innovation off the ground and try to, spread the good word of socialism around America.
Preaching the gospel. That's what I'm talking about.
Great work.
That's what I'm talking about. So I guess let's get into. We're gonna do. I know it's been a minute. We've been harping on these mini panel discussions around a theme. We've been doing studies from We Are City Builders occasionally. I think we're going to get back into our regularly scheduled work meeting, a work meeting that's kind of themed around how the 1930s and 40s Communist Party would hold their meetings with labor updates and news updates before deciding on what they're going to do as an organization. But we're just going to focus on the labor and the news, and then we're going to do a workshop to correct incorrect policies. So let's begin with labor updates. And who better to begin our labor update than our labor organizer, union organizer down there in Australia. So what's going on the ground with the material conditions for the people? And how's the struggle out there in Australia, brother?
Well, it's interesting. The article I was reading this morning, I heard about in the fruit and vegetable picking industry, rural primary industries, it employs a lot of backpackers and visa workers to pick fruit and veggies, and they're actually employed on a piece rate, which means as to how much fruit and vegetables they pick. Now, there was one actually article here. There's one talking. One backpacker was talking. A backpacker, for those of you, that's a terminology we use. Those are on a working holiday type visa. They'll visit Australia, travel around, and obviously find spurious work at times, and they could just be as ruthlessly exploited as well. Now, one backpacker here, he actually had to, like every 3 meters, find a tomato to pick. And at the end of the day, he got $31.24, where we had others that have either received a lot funnily less or some a bit more. Some are lucky to make even $50 a day. So if they work a whole 5-day week, they get $300. And that's well below any of our minimum rates. Now, the Australian Workers Union and the United Workers Union, which covers those type of workers in that industry, rural workers in that industry, have obviously now applied to what we call I call it the Unfair Work Commission, but it's a Fair Work Commission. It's like an industrial court to apply to set for a minimum wage. Now, obviously, there's a pushback by employer groups and some farmers. Actually, interesting, the farmers that usually push back are quite wealthy ones, not the smaller mum and dad type operator. But one actually, I was interesting quote. I actually put this on. I've just read. Sorry, there was actually the Australian Industry Group, which is a major employer body, was arguing that they don't need a minimum wage at all, and actually working piece rate is quite okay. I mean, obviously, someone coming out with an outlandish argument and statement like that, I mean, you obviously think, which planet are these people on? when they think these things. Because take it to yourself, you put yourself in a position, and you might be going, picking apples in an orchard or whatever type of fruit. It depends on what type of year. It could be cold weather, could be raining weather, it could be really hot weather as well. And obviously heat in Australia, where when the heat for us is quite commonplace. This is what I want to say. An employer body, the Australian Industry Group, argues that backpackers like Kahoo just don't need to be paid that much. And that's just the reality. This is where they're coming in the head. So they're working out all sorts of elements. If you're up in Australia's north, say in the Kimberley or Northern Territory, during the build-up to the wet season, it's just intensely humid and hot. You've got the big sun, you've got the tropical sun on you, just intense humidity. You may have an afternoon storm. They try and cool things down, but as soon as the sun comes out, it's steam again. That's the time to pick mangoes. So you're working in that. They're unbearable conditions, and they expect them to work on a piece rate because they don't care, because these workers move on. Obviously, they might here be temporary and they'll go back country origin, or they're just generally seasonal workers. But it just comes to show you too, even this type of industry, not just your typical factory or delivery type or service sector, but this type of industry, the rural sector is just as equal, if not a lot worse, that exploits its workers. And it just gives you a demonstration. Once Australia was known, setting the standards throughout the world, and it just shows how far we've gone down the track now, where, with a comment like that coming out, oh, you don't need to have that. You don't need to have all this. So what are they proposing? Everyone work for free. It's just just shows you the mentality they got, and it just shows you typical capitalism, imperialism, further and further reducing the purchasing power of workers to extract more surplus value, more profit.
Very powerful issue, very important issue, Comrade. Maybe I'll respond a little bit to, where you're laying down. I got a little bit of experience with agriculture work. That was actually my first job when I was like 14 or 15. Was picking watermelons. I could tell you the story in the heat, man. It hot. A minimum. I think I was getting $5 an hour. But I've been out in the fields, and pace work is horrible and disgusting. This was over 10 years ago, and I was picking blueberries for a bucket about this big, and maybe the fastest guy out there won't make it more than $20-25 a day. And it was in the sun, and it was hot labor. It was horrible. And, I went out down to Lumberton, and there was a group of us who left down from the sweatshops up here. We were working in Cody, and some of the folks working the chicken plant, a lot of undocumented workers as well. We would go and subsidize our wages on the weekend by picking, by doing day labor in the agricultural fields. And pace work is something that should always be fought against. And pace work, if you look at it right now, with all these new, driver apps and the gig economy, they even got truck drivers on these Uber for truckers. It's absolutely disgusting how much power these tech companies are having over our lives. But that's absolutely right. When we organize democratically controlled unions, that's great. David Fox. It's great to have that here. The movement in the U.S. is almost destroyed, except for a few trades. But I think it's coming back around again. I'd like to give a shout out to Comrade Pella, also known as Red Illuminati, also of the Center for Political Innovation, who has this will probably be my labor update. Actually, I don't know. Joey Schantz can talk about this too. But shout out to Comrade Pella, Red Illuminati, who is doing a real grassroots wildcat, independent strike to bring back the tour bus guides. Please subscribe to Red Illuminati. You can look further into his struggle. Essentially, after COVID, they have replaced the tour bus guides with audio recordings, and these audio recordings cannot give the full depth of the city. They cannot tell people to shop at local businesses, and they can't tell people to lower their heads when they got trees and signs and stuff overhead. Maybe I'll go into my own labor update situation. I recently, I spent a good I was out on the road like 7 years. I put a lot of struggle and sacrifice in to be able, to save up enough, get a house for my family. And after, and have my son, I was on the road 2 years being away from my son. Missed those years, almost 2 years. I've been off the road almost a year now. So I missed over a year of being with my son. And that's time you never get back. And now I'm at home, and these local jobs ain't paying, not nearly as much as I'm used to. So, and then how easy credit ripoffs they talking about, and all the credit companies want to give you this, and that with this interest, and you got to put your nose to the grindstone, not fall for their traps. I think as democratically as communities and community organizations, we should push, being thrifty, and we should push, responsibility. But at the same time, we're not blaming fellow workers for falling into their traps. We're just trying to strengthen ourselves, to be able not to do it, not to be able to do it. But we're not trying to blame people for falling for their games to get these basic consumer goods and even food and basic necessities. A lot of people were getting into credit card debt, and it's a big thing now. They put out more debt than ever with this COVID and the crisis that's going on around it. Maybe let's go to Comrade Joey. Comrade Joey, maybe you give us a quick labor update. Talk a little bit maybe about yourself or your community and the conditions that you face. Oh, I got
absolutely. So, I worked at retail for about 8 years. That's the industry that I spent the majority of my labor and time in. And I can tell you one thing, that retail workers are not paid anywhere close to a living wage. It's very often that a retail worker has to work 2-3 different retail jobs just to try to make ends meet. And, you can tell from the working conditions, a lot of these retail stores, it's not just that we were getting paid low wages, but more and more expectations are being felt on a few workers. For example, I'm sure that you're familiar with a lot of cashiers that are being replaced by like these self-checkout lanes. Well, those retail workers end up all those retail workers that get replaced, they have other jobs that they are doing outside of ringing up people. So when they let go of those cashiers, you're also letting go of like stock workers, people who are stocking the shelves inside the stores. You're letting go of people that make sure the stores are clean. And all that work gets put on to just a few less workers, and you're expected to get all of these things done in a given day, and quite honestly, it's extremely difficult to be able to keep up with it. So that's one of the reasons why while it isn't the solution per se to the crisis of capitalism, the brunt that retail workers face in this country, I think it's extremely important not to advocate for a $15 minimum wage, but I personally advocate for a $35 minimum wage. I think that would be a lot more reasonable for the expectations of what retail workers actually have to work. So maybe they wouldn't have to work 2-3 jobs just to be able to afford the rent. So that's one of the things I focus on largely because of my retail experience, is the struggle of retail workers. But I've worked in a lot of other industries too, just trying to, get out of the struggle of working constant retail. I've worked in warehouses, I've worked in a bread factory, I've done landscaping, and you know what? The issue is that a lot of people that are in my position, quite honestly, they don't know how to work in all these different industries. They don't have the education. They don't get provided the resources to, really build a career outside of retail either. So, it's very important for there to be a federal jobs guarantee that provides proper education, so workers can, actually get away from retail industry and, build a career that they can be proud of, that can take care of their family.
Powerful words, Comrade Joey. So we'll get right into our news segment of the show. We're going to start it off talking about Haiti. Now I'm going to give a little bit about the rundown. I highly suggest watching some of the content being put out by Danny Shaw on his channel and the few podcasts he's been on. I think he went on with Caleb recently, along with a few others. I also recommend the Gray Zone. Gray Zone is a great anti-imperialist media site where you can learn more about what's going on in Haiti. And essentially, I mean, the rundown, Haiti was never forgiven for being one of the first slave revolutions and a first black revolution. And they were never forgiven. And they were forced to pay 100 years of so-called reparations for their own freedom against the French. They paid 100 years of reparations to the French for freeing themselves. And then there was a coup against a popular elected leader by forces trained by the U.S. and the Dominican Republic. And then I'll go on to another part of Haitian history. Was, I think, the 2011 earthquake, where Cuba sent doctors. Everybody sent people from all over the world, and the U.S. comes in and sends military. And the U.S. takes over the situation with their military and protects the investments of U.S.-backed monopoly capitalists in the region. The same way that Blackwater was shooting poor black and brown people in the streets of New Orleans after the Hurricane Katrina hit was the same thing the U.S. military was doing in 2011 when they're supposedly helping after the earthquake. The current situation in Haiti is horrible. Recently, the president was outright assassinated in a wealthy neighborhood in his own home by foreign troops, by foreign mercenaries. And the dude that was in power didn't even have an electoral mandate. He was essentially a dictator that was imposed through the Western forces, by the imperialist forces. And then he was murdered in his own home. I mean, just think about it. They got leftists out there who are being like, we didn't like the guy, but it is absolutely disgusting. It's humiliating as a country that our leader could be assassinated at will by a few mercenary gangs. I mean, gangs basically run the country in association with the government. You have different gangs that are running the country. So the people that did the assassination were more than likely trained by the United States as well, because the majority of them were Colombian mercenaries. And the U.S. has bases in Colombia. The U.S. is funding paramilitary groups in Colombia, which are carrying out the drug trade when the U.S. is supposed to be having a war on drugs, when they're funding paramilitary forces to fight against the FARC. There was a peace treaty. I got a little bit of a feedback. But essentially, they're still funding paramilitary groups to assassinate union leaders and do all kinds of horrible stuff in Colombia. And some of those horrible forces were hired to kill the Haitian president. And then the provisional president, who took part in the coup against Aristide, the popular elected liberation theologist, populist figure, the dude who carried out a coup on behalf for the United States is now the provisional president of Haiti. And the first thing he does as the Haitian president is beg the United States to invade his own country. You know what happens when the United States invades a country? It literally destroys it. He is absolutely the puppet of the West. And so now here's Biden up here sitting all cool, like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to invade them or not. We've been asked to. I don't know if I should help those people. They ain't ever. When has the U.S. ever invaded somebody to help them? It's absolutely disgusting. First of all, if the government there is basically a puppet regime to begin with, it's completely unstable, and there's tons of U.S. investment just stealing the resources of the Haitian. And we should demand as U.S. workers, not in our name, do not invade the people of Haiti. U.S. hands off Haiti, and we would hope that they could have a socialist revolution in Haiti like they have done and achieved in Cuba. That's going to be our next subject, but let's go ahead and get a round of ideas on this. Let's start with Joey Schantz. Any response or anything to add to this news topic?
Well, personally, I'm seeing what's going on in Haiti, and it just seems like another example of American imperialism going into the global South, into the Caribbean, which we've done on so many occasions at this point now, between the banana wars and toppling and attempting to topple socialist and anti-imperialist governments. In this case, we were actually supported the Haitian government. We basically it was a puppet, but for some reason it seems like the imperialist forces seem to be maneuvering around here because for whatever reason that we don't know about, that person's got to go. So there's clearly something going on, and it's traditional American imperialism at its worst.
Good work. I didn't add this as part of my presentation. I'm going to add there is a history of the United States trying to get closer to certain forces, and then those forces ending up dead. And the Haitian president was actually, historically, this also happens to people. Usually people who do this also get assassinated. Is the Haitian president was trying to play the U.S. off of the growing Bolivarian revolutions. They were getting funding. The president was getting funding from Venezuela. I think some of the funds that were going to the president from Venezuela ended up being stolen. It was supposed to go to help the people, ended up getting stolen by the corrupt bureaucracy. So he was trying to play off working with the revolutionary forces and with the United States himself for corrupt political gain. So I mean that could be, that's it. The U.S. may have been behind it. We don't know for sure, but it does follow the track record of previous proven U.S. assassinations. Comrade David Fox.
Yeah. Well, look, looking from afar here in Australia, this is something that's not new to us either, and we've obviously seen US intervention everywhere around the world, and obviously they're trying to find. Obviously you could see the US empire declining bit by bit, the US dollar, monetary funds, everything declining by bit. Countries looking to trade new currencies. So, for example, jumping on China's One Belt, One Road initiative, which we'll talk about later on. Obviously having then obviously trading with Venezuela and others around the place and seeking financial help there. This is it's like a very big no-no to Wall Street and Washington and London. How dare you do that? Obviously in there to protect their interests, obviously, but are they going to do anything good to help the people? Well, the answer is no. We all know that. Wherever they've gone, look at Afghanistan now. It's just devastated. Taliban's taking back the country bit by bit again, and is everyone better off after what happened? No. Obviously, is anyone better off of any type of US invasion of every country? No. Ask the people of Iraq that. Ask the people, of Syria that as well. Although Syria was back on the front foot and had Russian backing the whole lot, but the fact is, the end of the day, no one is better off. And Libya is another classic case. It's now a destroyed basket case. We've seen it. It's absolutely what I'm told they've got two forms of government there, and I mean, they're literally still a war-torn country. So that just shows you some recent examples, but the whole history of it goes right back to, you might have to help me here, probably, well, dare say the late 1800s, possibly. And yeah, so what's happened? The whole imperial bloc, wherever they've gone, they've just created so much destruction and destabilisation. And it's going to take a long time for these countries to fully get control of their affairs and rebuild again. So even if they just, if Haiti had a revolution tomorrow and had a really good anti-imperialist government there, if you know what I mean, they've managed to do it, it's going to take them forever and a day to rebuild their country, because they'll be facing a big blockade, financial blockade and trading blockade as well. It'll be hard to get material goods in there, urgent medical equipment, education services, and material for housing people and for food. Just some vital things for human survival. That's going to be it's going to be incredibly tough for the Haitian people.
Right now, so we'll move right on to our next news topic. Let's see, Joey Schantz, you have some information about the U.S. government in China?
Yes. So recently, the Senate has decided on voting on a bill with bipartisan supports to basically sanction Chinese corporations in the Uyghur region of China. Reason being, they are arguing because there is supposedly slave labor going on. No, we don't know that for a fact. Let's be very clear. There doesn't appear to our knowledge, any sources that we've seen come out of China, any evidence that there's actual slave labor going on in the Uyghur region. But with that being said, though, it seems extremely hypocritical for the U.S. government to be passing laws to sanction China and Chinese corporations for supposed slavery that's going on in the Uyghur region of China, when we have slavery from our own companies. Our United States, just allows to go on. Nestle in particular, you'll notice Nestle, they use slave labor and extremely low starvation wage labor in South America for cocoa. Not to mention, they're also destroying our environment on a separate account in California by bottling water. And California already has a water shortage problem as it is. It doesn't seem like a very good idea to be, bottling this water. But point being, we demonize China left and right in the U.S. imperialist government, but we don't seem to criticize our own corporation. Now, I would argue it's because we're trying to maintain the capital of imperialism in the United States. But, it does come across as extremely hypocritical in the context of, and again, has no evidence supporting it to any sources about some sort of slave labor going on in the Uyghur region. In fact, from every reliable source that I have seen, the Uyghurs actually are benefiting from the Chinese Communist Party and what goes on in that region. They've, electrified the region. They provided, running water in all these households. The average lifespan has increased since the Chinese Communist Party has been investing resources within the region. You go left and right, it just seems that it's us trying to increase Cold War tensions, more likely to get into a literal war with a nuclear power, and in my view, that's highly problematic, and we need to back off of China, just like we need to back off of Haiti.
Yes. I mean, I've been seeing this build for some time. I remember I was working pretty early one morning, and I pop on the national imperialist radio there, NPR, try to get some news on the way to work. I think I remember one time they were always telling me about, we got to invade Afghanistan to save the women. Oh, if we take out the troops, all these women is going to be massacred, even though they're backing warlords that are pouring acid on women's faces as we currently speak. But they got to stay there to the so-called save the women. And next time, another thing you hear on NPR has been this thing. I think it's the Xinjiang region and the Uyghur people. And basically, they have been hyping up this slave narrative with absolutely no proof whatsoever. And, the material statistics coming out of it say the exact opposite. And what has been going on in the rest of China has been saying the exact opposite. China has raised over 800 billion people out of poverty. That is results. I used to be Christian, and Jesus would say, you know a man by his fruits. You know a person by their fruits. And it's the same with, Marxist, Leninist, or scientific socialists. We understand the world not from the lies and the ideas of the bourgeois liberals, but of the material conditions and the conditions of the working people and the international proletariat. And as the U.S., the failing, decaying empire as it is, as we see things get worse, the leader of the anti-imperialist bloc, China, is improving the conditions of the people in China and improving the conditions of everyone they do business with, which is one less place where they can send our jobs off to, which is one less place that is going to need U.S. loans and IMF loans to pay interest and be exploited to pay money to the monopoly capitalists so they can better oppress us here in the United States. So the NPR has been harping this narrative about, the Xinjiang region and the Uyghur people. And as far as we know, there is nothing but poverty alleviation programs going on in the region. They did have some issues with terrorism. Now, how that was dealt with, if that was dealt with perfectly okay, I do not know. But I'm not going to sit here and nitpick over an internal policy of a country when my own country is literally committing mass genocide around the world and is literally keeping my community in horrible working conditions. I ain't gonna go over it and say the Chinese people my enemy. The Chinese people never lowered my wage. Chinese people never try to evict me from my home. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. So we got to tell working people, poor black and brown working people, the Chinese people are not your enemy, regardless of what any of the media keeps telling you to think. So we should stand against this attack on the sovereignty. Now let's talk about sanctions. So let's talk about sanctions. What do sanctions do? Well, who are some people that have sanctions? The Russians. Iran has sanctions against them. Syria has sanctions against them. Do sanctions improve the conditions of the people? No. Sanctions deny people medical care. Sanctions deny people basic infrastructure. Sanctions are an act of war, and sanctions are literally murdering people. Sanctions are a coercive, violent act that oppresses people and steals resources that they can have and keeps them in lower material conditions. Why do they want to keep them in lower material conditions? So they can carry out regime change and attack competition to their power. The monopoly caps in the United States are nothing but a dirty street gang that wants to run the world and kill us here and kill the people around the world in the process. And we got to say we've had enough of this. We're going to stand together and fight in solidarity in our own neighborhoods and lock arms and be in solidarity with our brothers and sisters in the global South and all people in the international working class. Comrade David Fox.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, that's absolutely right. Sanctions, every time the US and its allies put sanctions on a country. In fact, they're not winning the hearts and minds over it all. The fact is, what happens, it's turned the whole population against them. And we were talking about, obviously Iran's a classic case in point, also Cuba as well, which we'll probably talk about as well. But you obviously see all this. As soon as they even put sanctions on a country, the whole country, not just the government of that country, but it's actually the whole population turns against the US. So actually sanctions do not work for the US's failed foreign policy plan. We actually best describe it as its failed business plan for the whole world. It's just making the situation worse. And what gets me as well, because we're just talking about the criticism put towards China. Well, criticism towards China is nothing new. It's going on the last 20 years. They talk about how China was the greatest polluter of CO2 emissions in the whole entire world. Well, I think they've turned that around, because when I last looked, they're actually re-greening China. They've actually got barren deserts they've turned into forests again and prime farmland. They're actually advancing a lot in agricultural technology there as well, far advanced than what we're considering. I mean, this here in Australia, we're still dealing with degradation, drought, CO because of cataclysmic climate change. I mean, it wasn't just so long ago. We had intense bushfires here. We've never seen a firestorm like this. It was never supposed to ever happen here, like complete firestorms with lightning and thunder and fire. It basically just decimated bushland. And so, Australia's no just as guilty as the US criticising China. It was interesting, the foreign minister of China, or the ambassador to Australia, actually out up and criticised Australia back and said, don't you dare criticise us about treatment of other people, about the environment. And he listed a whole list of crimes Australia's done, especially towards its Indigenous people, which, it was a disgraceful history of Australia, if that's part of it, of the near genocide of its native people, of its Indigenous people. And also, too, look at our land and look at our degradation. I mean, I did say early on, heat and Australia go together. It's nothing new to us, but it's just so intense now. And why? Because we're actually one of the biggest contributors per person to CO2 emissions. And so, that's just what I find, the whole hypocrisy of the whole thing. Quick to point out, they're the bad guys. Oh, they're doing all this, which they're not. And if you actually dig through it and just look at it, we're just being fed propaganda from the imperial machine. It's just basically a big lie propaganda to believe us. And even some in our Australian government would be keen to actually trying to be we'll do some forms of military action towards China. Well, interesting though, the masses here, the mass of Australian workers here don't want a war with China. Even though they might have some criticisms towards it, but they certainly do not want a war with it. And I don't think anyone does. So, the only people I'm seeing who want war with China is the respected governments, the weapons manufacturers, and certain military apparatchiks. So that's who'll benefit, and who'll benefit from them all. Hip hip hooray while we're gurgling down the blood of the prophets. While we're suffering on the battlefield. So. And that's all they care about. So, I think the whole thing about where China's developing and moving forward, I think is, and the criticisms towards it's completely unjustified at all. And I actually found it a bit rich when one media commentator talked about Western liberal values. Well, it's where those Western liberal values, it seems to stuff the whole world up completely. So, I sometimes think, China's looking at us and just laughing at us, you're just typical. You're just picking a rock up above your head. You're going to drop it on your toes sooner or later. So just waiting for that moment.
All right. Maybe we'll hit up a domestic issue here in the United States. Just this last week, I'm sure a lot of comrades out there that got kids probably know about this. I think it was either the 14th or the 15th. The first child credits went out. $300 a month per child given to families by the IRS. Bernie Sanders has been esteeming this as the greatest policy since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And that Biden is the best president, most progressive president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and they have temporarily ended poverty for 50% of U.S. families. I think we lost Comrade Joey. Hopefully he'll be able to come back with us. But essentially, this is all complete and utter bullshit. I mean, there is no way around this. You know, I like to talk about U.S. presidents. They're not some kind of competition against two separate forces. U.S. presidents are a relay race of representatives of the monopoly capitalist working on the same team to screw over the working class within the United States and to screw over and exploit the entire world, especially the oppressed nations and the global South. And that there's no other way around it. I mean, that's what's going down. Hopefully, Comrade Joey will be able to come back with us. Oh, there he goes. Let's maybe get him back on here. So anyways, so U.S. presidents are really, we look up under Trump. Things looked like Trump said the economy was getting better. And before the pandemic, it kind of looked like that, but it didn't. It was superficial. Essentially, Trump gave the large companies tax breaks. You know what those companies did with those tax breaks? They bought back their own stock, inflating their own stock prices, making the Wall Street economy look great, which is having less and less bearing on the actual reality of the situation every day. So Trump's economy was a bubble ready to burst. Just like all these right-wing economic policies, that bullshit about trickle down, this whole you're gonna tax break your way into growth, it does not work. It was a bubble ready to burst. And then when COVID came along, it burst that bubble. It completely burst that bubble. And what Trump was able to do was blame it on the local governors who weren't given resources to bail out the people, but were forced to shut down their economies to preserve human life. So he was able to blame the economic collapse, which was created by his bubble, on the Democratic mayors. So here there is, and now we got Biden coming to office. And we got a horrible economy, and look at like he's trying to do, and Trump did some stimulus. Now Biden's trying to do a little bit of stimulus as well, but stimulus without actually having a planned economy and being able to grow the economy and able to move the economy around to actually provide good for the people creates inflation. And now you go down to Walmart and bacon is $5 a pack when it was $3 2 months ago. I can't even eat. You know, I love to have me. I make a great bacon, egg, and cheese quesadilla, and I love them. I eat it with salsa. My wife gets up and eats them. It's great. I can't even have my bacon, egg, and cheese quesadilla because the goddamn price of bacon is too damn high because of this inflation. And that's what it is. It is a relay race. A relay race for the monopoly capitalists. Trump does his shit that helps the monopoly capitalists and fucks us, and then Biden does his shit that helps the monopoly capitalists and fucks us up. And that's just how it is. And they go back and forth. And we need our own system. We need socialism. We need a planned economy. We need a new America. And we should not be praising the Democrats for these bullshit pittances that are doing nothing in the long run. You know, I'm in favor of more child credits. I would be in favor of universal basic income, you know, if they didn't use it to fuck some other shit over. You know, I'm not against that. But in all reality, the capitalist system is not working for the working people. Comrade Joey?
That's right.
So I'm looking at this $300 child credit, and I can say that not just is it something that it's going to cause inflation, like you were saying, but I mean, let's just also be real. $300 is really not a lot to take care of a child anyhow, even before the economy was hyperinflated through all these stimulus. So it doesn't resolve anything really in the short term for most families, quite honestly. And in the long term, it's going to have more damaging effects. But part of me wonders, is it on purpose? I mean, they tend to keep the people oppressed in the global south and the far east. Maybe it's imperialism coming home to coming home to roost. That's my input on that.
Comrade Fox?
Well, the fact is, I mean, I'm not opposed to any type of allowance or what they call or assistance or whatever. I'm not opposed to that at all. But it really is just a band-aid solution to a bigger problem. I mean, obviously, I could think of a million and one things they could also do: provide free child care as well. And all these other things to assist. Especially for single parents as well. They're them to assist them in the workforce, etc. But it's not really addressing anything more. To me, it's just throwing a little bit of money here. Yep, we've got and how. It's not going to resolve anything at all as prices keep continuing up. But that's basically robbing Peter to give Paul, and that's it's really into solution. So typical. It's a capitalist. The capitalist trying to come up with a solution to a capitalist problem, and they know full well they ain't got a problem with it. So they'll give you a breadcrumb, but obviously they're expecting that will give you a full stomach, and it's obviously not going to work. The situation, the material conditions for us here in Australia and US and everywhere else is continuing to spiral out of control and become worse and worse and worse. So they're obviously looking at other things as well. But the other thing as well, what they're saying, they give us a little bit, mate, okay, it's a child care assistance or whatever it is, their allowance they give you. But the thing is, they'll find enough something else to take off you as well. All right, well, we'll cut back costs here, we'll cut back here, we will, and you'll have to pay it. So that $300 ain't going to last 1 minute in your account. This is going to have to go off to pay for something. And so at the end of the day, you're still actually able, at the end of the week, got nothing. And when they're interesting, when the very wealthy turn around, when the bourgeoisie turn around and say, oh, but we've given you all this. Yeah, that's all great. You're giving us all, but it's all gone because we can't afford to live. Basically, the cost of living is too high. We can't even afford some basic necessities. So, what expect us to save at the same time, expecting all these miracles to happen with these great allowances. Now, what's going to happen even further? But you're going to watch not just the current people in poverty, but you watch that poverty base expand as well, further and further and further. So there's just no actual proper policies or programs put in place to alleviate that. Interesting, when we're talking about China before, like I was actually quite very proud of the fact that China lifted 800 million people out of poverty. It's interesting that they tend to want to China bash, but at the same time here in Australia, the US and elsewhere, we seem to be driving more people into poverty. So, what's wrong with a country lifting people out of poverty and doing really good things there? Well, there should be anything wrong with that. We should be all going clapping our hands and congratulating a job well done and learn from how we're going to lift people out of poverty. But the system doesn't require it. The system requires more and more of us to be actually in dire poverty and poor, and that to keep extracting more and more profits. So that's what we're exactly seeing here when we call about when we're asking for, all types of allowances. I mean, as I said, I'm not opposed to them. Even with we had a discussion about the universal basic income one time, but also too, it's got to be a matter of be careful what you wish for, because capitalists can turn around. All right, we'll give you a universal basic income, or that'll cover some basic cost of living, but we're going to take this off you, take this off you. You're going to have to pay for it for an expensive insurance scheme. So once again, the end of the week, you got nothing. So it's just a matter of just be careful what we wish for at times as well. But it just comes to show these are just band-aid solutions. They actually do not address the systematic problem of imperialism. Mm-hmm.
So I just want to make it, before we move to the next issue, I want to make it perfectly clear. I am not opposing the child credit. I think we could organize people to extend the child credits. The child credits are only going to happen for 2 years, and then they're going to take it away, and then you're going to be right back to where you was at, or maybe even worse conditions. We could organize people to demand to further the child credits.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is, go ahead, comrade. Go ahead.
I was just going to say too, I mean, this is exactly right. We can organise around this. I mean, the unemployed, that's how the communists and that organised the unemployed in the 30s, basically to normal wage, proper jobs and full employment, some basic demands that we can actually rally around, not just throw stuff. So I'm like yourself, we're not opposed to this, but there's got to be some proper organising around it. And moving forward, and some great organising, some better demands, immediate demands that we can achieve. I just want to round it off. We're talking about US presidents. Well, during the campaign, your last elections with Trump and Biden, someone said, Biden was the lesser of two evils. I says, no such thing. Someone's got to be more efficient of managing evil. So it's one of, Trump was just hopeless at managing evil, so they had to replace to get someone who's a lot more efficient at managing evil. So it's not who's the lesser of two evil; he's still voting evil.
So what I want to really lay down is you go to work to feed your family. You work 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week. What do you take home? Not enough to pay your bills. Not enough for basic wants. But that the boss goes all the way to bank, and these major companies and these few monopolist corporations keep getting richer and richer and richer. And we give them far more than we get back. The bosses need us. We don't need them. And you are worth more than $300 a month. Your child is worth more than $300 a month. And we should not be happy with their crumbs. We need to keep on fighting, keep on demanding what we deserve and what we produce, and that is the whole pie. And we get the whole pie, we get the whole system. We can nationalize our resources, nationalize oil, nationalize gas, nationalize timber, plan the economy for our interest, expand the economy, and improve our way of life. And that's exactly what they're doing in China. That's what they're doing in the global South. And that's what we're doing here. And that's what Working Class Revolt, Anti-Imperialist America, and Center for the Political Innovation is trying to get out to the masses to get people to understand. Comrade Joey, maybe one more thought before we move on to the next news section.
Yeah, I just have to say that you're absolutely right. We need to nationalize our resources. We need to nationalize banking is another big one. There's a lot of things that we need to start moving in the direction of. And that's exactly what the Center for Political Innovation is all about. And that's part of the reason why I advocate and work with that organization. It's extremely vital that, average people understand how important it is to, make sure that we get what we deserve as workers in this country. And that starts with us organizing our workplaces and our communities.
Right on, comrade. So we'll move on to our last news item, and that is what is going down in the socialist country of Cuba. Now, I think it was last Sunday, there was coordinated so-called protest on a smaller scale in Cuba itself and in Miami and other major cities across the United States, with very vague demands of freedom and democracy. Now, I've been looking into it. I recommend sources like The Gray Zone. I recommend Ramiro Funes's work that he did recently, among others. And it has been well documented that these coordinated so-called protests were being funded by the United States, backed by the United States, and funded by social media platforms like Twitter. And there is tons and tons of Twitter bot accounts that were resharing the so-called these demands for very vague demands for democracy and freedom. And there was hundreds of these bots like just pushing this information, pushing this mass information. And the media campaign is completely twisted. There was these very small protests which they put everywhere. They put it everywhere. And when they couldn't find images of these right-wing Gusano protests, they started taking pictures of other protests in other cities and saying that stuff was coming from Cuba. They started taking pictures of the mass demonstrations of people that were in favor of the government and saying that was the anti-government protests. Like, the media campaign outright lies about what's going on. And the U.S. government, NED, and all these, I mean, it's not a conspiracy. It is laid out in plain detail that the United States funds and he spends billions of dollars for countries all over the world to destabilize any country that stands up for itself and improves the conditions of the people. And that's exactly what is going on in Cuba. And now we got these imperialist sheepdogs out here trying to act like they're all good and stuff. And they'll say, you know, you got to end the blockade, but I believe they have the right to protest in Cuba. Well, first of all, these protests are not like here, where we go out to an empty building on Saturday, we say end the war, and then they don't end the war, and then they expand the wars, and then the presidential candidates say they're going to end the war, or posture like they're going to end the wars, and then they don't end the war. You know, that isn't what happens. Basically, these right-wing groups commit acts of terrorism and destabilize those governments. And then when that government responds, you know, within self-defense, and then that government is called, you know, authoritarian. And then what the worst of all, they got these liberals, sheepdogs, social democrats that claim to be on the side of the working class, that claim to be progressive, that are repeating the lies, that are justifying the attacks on the Cuban people. And one of the biggest crimes, we talked about this earlier, as far as sanctions, the reality is a number of laws and economic policies of the United States have created a practical blockade, a practical economic blockade around Cuba. So if you look at, you know, pictures of Cuba and movies of Cuba, you see all these cars from the 1950s. Because they can't buy from the cars in the United States. They can't buy cars from other countries because of all these repressive economic policies. Like if a ship docks in Cuba, it can't go to the United States for a few months. Or some of these big contracts, if you make a contract with the United States and get, you know, $90 billion or several $100,000 in business, you're not allowed to do that, you know, that $10,000 business with Cuba. So essentially, they have been cut off from the global economy. And in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell and they lost a large portion of their aid, there was mass starvation. And they were forced, without material goods, without technology, to basically be a leader in organic agriculture, because, you know, they weren't given, you know, I always say a lot of bourgeois academics will be like, this is called the special period in Cuba. We'll say, oh, that is a leading in the world. We should implement the organic agriculture that came out of Cuba. And I say that is incorrect, even though it was wonderful what the Cubans were forced to accomplish with organic agriculture and unmechanized agriculture. They were in a horrible situation because they didn't have the technology. I would say that China's it isn't what Cuba was forced to do that is an example of what socialist countries do in agriculture. It is what China has chosen to do with highly mechanized agriculture. That is an example to the world. But essentially, these decades of the blockade against Cuba is creating the horrible conditions that the imperialists, like to stir up people around to create instability and then attack those countries for being authoritarian. Now, my position is that all socialists, progressives, peace-loving people, or just basic humanitarian people in general should have unwavering and relentless support of the Cuban people and their government. The Cuban government has raised the conditions of the people in horrible circumstances. If you compare the conditions of Cuba to Haiti, compare the conditions in Cuba to Puerto Rico, to Honduras, they are far, far better, and they have done it under a practical blockade of their economy. It's absolutely amazing what the people have done, and as the imperialists attack our working class brothers and sisters in Cuba, they are attacking us. And as the imperialist sheepdogs like AOC and Sanders and a lot of them want to repeat the lies, the absolute lies against the people, we got to call them out too. Comrade Joey?
Exactly.
Yeah, so recently, actually, Caleb Maupin actually was interviewing some of the Guisano protesters here in New York City, and he went out to them and he was saying that, do you guys support ending the embargo on Cuba? And oddly enough, they all were saying no, and they said it both in English and as well as in Spanish, and it's just incredible, like these Guisano protesters here in the United States seem to be, not supporting their Cuban brothers and sisters there in Cuba, and it's just incredible, and it. Now, we don't know this part for a fact, but it appears to be in the one video that the protesters actually had a handler. They were in a face mask with a hoodie on, so you couldn't see their face, and they were kind of like rushing the protesters away from Caleb, trying to communicate, asking, do you support ending the embargo? And that's to be very clear, ending this embargo in Cuba literally means that people will be able to get food in the country, they'll be able to get medicine, they'll be able to get access to technology to improve their everyday working class lives. I mean, it just makes sense. And we've been doing this for, 60 some odd years now. Correct me if I'm wrong on the exact amount there. But, it's incredible, like, there just seems to be an extreme movement in the United States of more protesters on the streets arguing against the Communist Party in Cuba that have done their best to try to improve the material lives of the Cuban people and have been very successful despite the embargo. Then, actual people there in Cuba, it's incredible to me.
Comrade Fox?
Well, first of all, I'd like to actually congratulate everyone in New York and other areas, in other cities in the US, countering for actually organising these pro-Cuban rallies against the anti-Cuban ones. And I saw that all on YouTube, and I also shared up on on social media. And yeah, well done to the CPI too, being part of the driving force for that. And I think that was actually really clever that Caleb actually exposed them for what they are. And you could, like for all of us, we could just see right through it and just see them for what they really are. And really, by rights, I actually like this great meme I was actually showing around. I don't know if I've set it up on my own page, but it was quite funny. But actually, really just sending these type of people up when they're complaining, oh, we want our plantations back. And, they don't care about the population of Cuba. They don't care if they get sick or anything happens to them. They just want all their wealth back, and that's all they care about. So it comes to show you that they're not the sort of type of people that actually don't really care less about them, except for themselves as well. And I can see what obviously the US government's up to here. They're trying to garner public support to intervene in Cuba. It's not like they needs to at all. But I think one thing that's confident, I spoke with some comrades yesterday about this. We're talking about it, and unfortunately we couldn't organise anything here in Victoria or New South due to lockdown. But however, I think we've actually said, we've all agreed, we've actually got great confidence in the Cuban people to pull through, because they're not going to accept this. I mean, it depends how, the US can threaten them. The US imperialists can threaten Cuba as much as they like, but the population is solid behind their government and behind their island nation, and they're not going to allow anything. And the last time that was anything tried to happen, physical invasion and wars, the US lost. So they're actually not, and I've explained it, the US military machine's not designed for a guerrilla warfare or anything like that. It's designed to do one thing, to attack, and that's it. But it's really, it's not designed to do anything else. And plus, its machine is so far spread and outdated and wrong and everything else. It's just, it's not going to get anywhere. So at least one thing we do take some comfort that the Cuban people will stand up and they'll come through this out on top. And basically, the people will be failing all these Miami Cubans and others out there, the anti-Castro or anti-communist forces and all that. They're the ones who are going to be the losers in the long run. And I think bit by bit, the more education we get out about Cuba, the more people will explain what's really going on here. And if anyone says, if anyone's has some objectionable views, we ask them, is Cuba an immediate threat to anyone? Really? A population of 11 million against a population of 350? Really? What's Cuba a threat to us here in Australia? Really? It just... So a lot more education to happen, obviously, and that's got to be very vital component about some organising around this. And however, I think, as I said, I'm pretty confident, and also a lot of other comrades here, that Cuba will just come out top of this. They'll just go, yep, whatever, and continue on what they've been, what they've had to do. But I think one vital important thing out of this is not just opposing the anti-Cuban forces, but also to how we're going to campaign to get the blockade lifted once and for all, so Cuba can go on quietly, go about its daily business and develop its economy and country even further.
All right. I think we'll move on to our workshop portion of the show. I'm going to be bringing up the incorrect points, and let's see. We'll start with Comrade Fox. We'll try to give a rebuttal. Then we'll move on to Joey, and then I'll finish and rebuttal myself. So I'm going to take off the working class revolutionary hat for one moment, and I'm going to put on a MAGA hat for 2 seconds. It says MAGA. It's red. I'm going to put it on there, and it ain't just your standard. It ain't your standard illiterate hillbilly that's a MAGA, that's a Trump supporter. I mean, a lot of people have fallen for his bullshit. I mean, more people of color, more oppressed people is more scientific way of saying it, voted Trump in the second election than the first. Were conned by it. Well, you're conned by a con artist. I mean, we all get conned. Neither Democrats or Republicans support the working class people. So anybody who votes for either of them is being conned. But I'm going to put on the MAGA hat for a second, and I'm going to address this to Comrade David Fox. In the United, things were better under Trump. Bacon was $3 instead of $5 under Trump. I had far more buying power, and now I'm losing everything. And these damn Democrats have hurt my business. I had a cousin that owed a restaurant that went under business because of Biden. We need to put a Republican back into power, and then we will be able to have our lives back. Comrade Fox, how you gonna respond to that?
Sorry, I'll chuckle on that. Well, it's interesting. I mean, it's not so dissimilar here from Australia. When I've heard when when the Liberals were in, I was able to run this restaurant, but when Labor came in, I wasn't able to. Look, it's not a new argument we've heard. I mean, look, they're both countries of capital of imperialism, and that's one thing to understand. They must put policies in place that will spread imperialist capitalist profits even further. But the fact is, at the end of the day, look, what was it like before Trump? What was it like before Obama? What was it like before Bush? What was it like before Clinton, et cetera, et cetera? As you go back further, we actually it's working in a spiral effect. It's actually getting worse and worse, and it doesn't matter who forms government, by the Democrat or Republican. They are going to enforce policies in place that will obviously benefit big business, the multinationals, Wall Street, Pentagon, Washington or London Stock Exchange, etc. That's what they're going to benefit. They're going to be very little or nothing at all for common working people of our respective countries, let alone those countries too that are trying to stand on their own feet. We've just been talking about Cuba and China and Haiti and everyone else. They are not. They are actually there to enforce and to expand and basically the executive managers of imperialism. So you could turn around and say, oh, I was much better off under Trump. Well, not really, you weren't. The fact is, it was just a matter of time before everyone's purchasing power was even further diminished, that they ain't able to attend your restaurant to buy a nice meal, whatever you made there.
Comrade Joey?
I'm sorry. Am I supposed to like rebuttal to that as I was a Republican?
Yeah, I made the position that things were better under Trump, and we need to get a Republican back in office so things continue to be good like they were.
So,
and how would you respond to that? Yes, how would you respond to that?
Okay, well, I would say that neither party represent the working class. Sure, it might have been marginally better, but you have to understand that every 5 to 7 years there's an economic crisis, and we just happen to be, in one of those 5 to 7 year economic crises. So take in consideration that, the problem isn't red team or blue team. No, the problem is capitalism. We need to overthrow the system by building our communities and our workplaces, and we can't just keep voting for the lesser of two evils. We need to create a better good.
So just like actually just on that, it doesn't matter. It's not the lesser of two evils. At the end of the day, you're voting evil for either of them.
Evil and more effective evil, is our comrades at the Black Agenda Report often say. Let's see. Right on, man. Let's see how.
This one
go ahead.
It's the same. Yeah, it's the two cheeks of the same backside.
I like that. I'm going to use that one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You got me distracted there. Okay, so how would I think you guys did a pretty good rebuttal on that. Let's see. All right, I think we'll move on to the next one. So I'm going to take off my MAGA hat and I'm going to stick on my Bernie shirt. I am a Bernie supporter. They stole the election from Bernie. I don't care that he actually dropped out of it and gave up on us. He was forced out. They made him do it. If only we could get Bernie into office, our lives would be better. And Bernie is correct. Look, Bernie is against the blockade and the embargo. But Bernie is absolutely correct when he calls out those bad communists, those bad socialists, not like us, dignified and democratic socialists, but those horrible, evil, authoritarian communists who don't even allow protests. They don't even allow protests. Comrade Joey?
So I would like to point out the fact that not just do they allow protests, Cuba actually has a thing where they allow the protests, and then they have people that come in that rebuttal those protests and talk to the members of the Cuban community that are offended or disagree with Cuban policy. So that would be the first thing I would have to say. I mean, but then that's dismantle the whole authoritarian socialist, authoritarian communists. Almost every single socialist and communist system that's ever been created, including in Cuba, is extremely democratic. In fact, Cuba specifically had, in the last election cycle, from my understanding, had almost 90% of people that actually went out to the polls to vote. I mean, if we're talking about a democratic system, and let's just be real, Bernie Sanders couldn't even get a majority of his supposed supporters online to actually show up at the polls. So there's that. But I mean, in general, in the United States, we haven't had anything close in our whole country's lifetime to a 90% turnout at the polls. So how authoritarian is a government that has that level of involvement within their own communities?
Comrade Fox?
Well, regarding Bernie Sanders, all right, yes, look, he generated a lot of interest in politics and generated a lot of discussion, very, very important. The fact is, okay, let's just have a look at a couple of things. There was some element of truth. I actually believe his own party did stab him in the back. It wasn't so dissimilar what happened to Jeremy Corbyn in the UK with the Labor Party over there. They don't understand the nature of what the Democratic Party is. It's an imperial bourgeois party. That's what it is primarily. It was originally the party of the slave owner, the Southern plantation owner. So but the point for what it is now, that's what it is. Now, let's assume if Bernie stayed in the race, and let's assume he achieved US president. Obviously, everyone be all sorts of accolades from around the world, especially the synthetic left will be having a field day on it. Everything's looking at, we got our man in government. The fact is, what was he going to be able to achieve if he was US president? First of all, he'd have a hostile Congress, a hostile Senate. He'd have to deal with the CIA, the Pentagon, the FBI, the NSA, Wall Street, and all these various other apparatchiks around him. I mean, he might have even put some good social programs in for the US. But that's the point. And the fact is, too, when he's talking about lifting the blockade on Cuba, of course we would support that. That's a no-brainer for us. But the fact is, his attitude towards a lot of our socialist countries as well is pretty appalling. He doesn't clearly not understanding really what the actual imperialist system is like. This is what we're living under. It's not a government policy. It's a system we live under. And the fact is, if he thinks he's going to change it with a smiley face and make it all good, I don't know how you're going to achieve that. It's like turning cancer. It's like a cancer. How are you going to turn cancer into a good cancer? There's no such thing. This is the issue he'd be up against. And I think, well, quite frankly, he wouldn't even last a year in office anyway. They'd have him turfed out. They'd have him find ways to put charges up against him or find a way to push him out, if not down to, I dare say, to a brutal coup if they have to force him out. So even if he intended to do some great things for everyone in the US, he wouldn't have been able to put those measures into place in the first place. In fact, he would have just had to go along the same policies and continue them on even further and develop them further. And also, too, what we need to break. Yeah, you can go into under the currency, you can go into the major parties with some type of good intentions, but you understand that we live under an imperialist system. Doesn't matter if you put a smiley face onto it. it's still imperialism in the end of the day. It's still driving everyone into the ground, requiring most of the world to be poor. So the oil bankers and the banks, the international finance, the very few are wealthy at the top, while the rest of us are poor, and they don't care how they go about it. They don't care if they have to virtually destroy the planet to maintain and increase their profits. That's what they'll do, and that's what Bernie would have had to do in the long term. Be the smiley face of imperialism, and that's basically what we were seeing there.
I'm very frank on this issue. Bernie Sanders, AOC, the Squad, the lot of them, and the up-and-coming Nina Turner are imperialist sheepdogs who don't give a fuck about you. They are out for their careers, and they are backing one half of the political force, which is the most destructive, exploitative, and mass murdering organization in human history. Imperialism led by U.S. imperialism. They are part of the organization of why we are in this mess to begin with. Where is the health care? You say you want to get us health care. You say you're going to get it. Where is the results? I have seen nothing. A great comrade of mine, Karena Akri Paez of Telejaguar, wrote an amazing article saying 4 reasons why the Democratic Party will never be the vehicle for progressive change. And she documented the last 4 decades of supposedly progressive forces that were funneled into the Democratic Party to die. Progressive movements that were funneled into the Democratic Party to die. There is no material change that will be affected by the Democratic Party ever in the current conditions. It is impossible. We need grassroots. We need a broad coalition of working class power, of the power of oppressed peoples. Where are they improving the conditions of the people? They're improving the conditions of the people in China. They're improving the conditions of the people in Bolivia. They're improving the conditions of the people in Venezuela. And how did the government of Venezuela come into power? And how did the government of Bolivia come into power? They came into power in a broad, working class, anti-neoliberal coalition. And they came into power by third parties. There is no hope within the Democratic Party. Now let's talk about who is raising people out of poverty. China's raising people out of poverty. Cuba's raising people out of poverty. So you're pinning your hopes on somebody that is attacking the people that are doing what we need here. Imperialist sheepdog. So you say, this is what Bernie Sanders says. Oh, I'm against the embargo, and that's great. But they're authoritarian, and we should be concerned about their democracy. Well, first of all, you don't understand democracy. You should read you should read Lenin's State and Revolution. Lenin's State and Revolution, he talks about bourgeois democracy is simply an illusion and a drama to keep us fighting. Now, I think we should fight for democratic rights whenever possible and use the fight for democratic rights to help build power. As you know, it's kind of like the training ground for the coming revolution, or even we'll try to vote it into power if possible. But bourgeois democracy is a lie. Do you know? This is what people don't understand. The level of freedom, the level to be able to protest, the level to be able to choose what you have is a direct result of stability and material prosperity. That is why we have more freedom in the United States and in Europe and in Australia than the majority of the countries in the global South, because they're unstable countries, because they're poor countries, because they are kept poor. They are kept poor and exploited. And then when countries countries take power and kick out the imperialists and become socialist governments and become governments that represent the people, like in Iran, like in Syria, like in Cuba, and you call them authoritarian. Why do they need to take strict discipline? Because their country is poor. What caused that poverty? Hundreds of years of colonization. And then decades upon decades of imperialism and imperialist sabotage. When the reason why Assad has to do what he has to do to keep the basic amount of stability is he is in constant threat of U.S. attacks. Half the country is being overrun by U.S.-backed terrorists that are trying to destroy him. And then you're going to say, oh, he's undemocratic, and hold him to the standards of a Western country. That is bullshit. That is that is a mistake, and it is wrong. The anti-imperialist bloc and the socialist countries have every single right to defend their stability, to defend the achievements that they have made for those people. And us as working workers in the United States, we want those achievements, and those are our comrades, and those are the way it's going to do it. And that's how we're going to get here, through socialism, through a planned economy. And it is a long uphill battle. I introduced a few more comments, maybe, and we're getting to the end of the show. Maybe if we could get a closing statement from first Joey and then David Fox. Joey, any closing statements to the audience here tonight?
So I'll just throw a brief shout out to our CPI website. It's cpiusa.org. You can check out what our organization is all about, and I think it's extremely important what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get out of the movement and into the masses, so definitely recommend checking that out. But one thing to always keep in mind, y'all, just make sure you are witnessing to your local communities and your local workplaces. You know, I mean, we're not going to change anything if we aren't willing to actually, step out of our comfort zone and actually, spread the good news of socialism across America.
Yeah.
Comrade David Fox.
I think you're absolutely right there. And I think that's important. What we actually got to know the masses, got to know your community, get to know your people properly, and understand where they're coming from the masses to the masses. And that's vitally important. If you don't have that general understanding of them, then we're obviously head against a brick wall. And it's a very vital point. I've always said that. And they're quite correct. Get out of the movement and get into the masses. I think that's it's vitally important. But it's been a great show tonight. It's good to be back. And also good we can do things with a sense of humor.
Right on. Just a few announcements before we close. Next week we will not be having a working class revolt. The next working class revolt will be 8 p.m. Eastern on the 31st of July, and we will be having our good friend Karina Acri Paez on of Telly Jaguar, and we will be discussing the need to build a broad front anti-neoliberal coalition in the United States. We'll also be having another comrade from the Center for Political Innovation who has roots in Bolivia, who will be talking about the movement for socialism there as an example of how to build the broad working class anti-neoliberal front. Let's go ahead and do our chant. If you guys could repeat after me, hold up your fist. Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to struggle.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
Dare to win.
All power to the people.
All power to the people.